Hello everybody, I'm Mr. Gone. Welcome to our very first video of the year. Oh my gosh, can you believe it? We're already here. And today we're going to be talking about the government. I know, it's your favorite topic and we're going to be dealing with it for quite a while actually. But we're going to start from the very beginning. And to understand our Constitution, to understand the types of things that the U.S. founders were thinking about when they created that document, you have to understand not everything, but several things that came before. They were mostly working in an English tradition, right? Off of English laws and kind of the equivalent of an English constitution that came before. So there's two important documents that are like the very base of what the U.S. Constitution, or what the U.S. Constitution kind of borrows from, and they're called the Magna Carta and the English Bill of Rights. So the Magna Carta is a very kind of almost ancient document. It's actually from like the 1200s, which our country wasn't founded until 1776. So that's a lot of years. This is like knights and lords and kings and things when this document is drafted up. The King of England basically had tried to fight his lords and say, hey, you have to like pay these taxes. The lords didn't like that. There was a big rebellion. It was a whole mess. Doesn't really matter too much, except the lords all sat the king down. They had kind of beaten him in a war, and they sat him down. They said, here's a list of things that are very important to us, and these are our rights, and you have to follow them. And it made it pretty much so that you would have kind of this concept called the consent of the governed. Not all the governed in this case, because you're talking about, lords in England, but there are certain people that the king has to listen to in order to rule, get their okay on things. Can't just say, oh, well, I'm doing that now. And this document had a lot to do with taxes and money and things like that. So it really was the beginning, the very beginning of a path to have a written government in the English tradition where the government can't just do whatever it wants, and you have certain rights that people are going to have. So big things from the Magna Carta, to sum it up. You have representation before the government does things, especially taxing, and it has protections for people, like when they get put on trial, right? Like you might have heard something called the jury of your peers. Well, that can like trace its roots back to this. And it was between, the king and his lords, the upper crust of society. So it didn't apply to everybody. But by the time we're going to get to what I'm about to talk about next, and then the U.S. colonies, it'll be a very important document. It will have been around for a while. So, fast forward a few hundred years after the Magna Carta, and we're at the English Bill of Rights. So it's actually written when the colonies were pretty much already in existence. We're talking like the mid-1600s, I believe. And a lot of it had been developed naturally and just not necessarily written down yet. So a lot of English people believed they had certain rights, certain things the government couldn't do to them, certain things they were going to be secure from and secure to do, and now it needed to be written down in what we call the English Bill of Rights. So, how did it come about? Long story short, and it's a very long story and very confusing one, a king ended up actually being killed, and there's this weird phase where England doesn't quite have a king, and then they bring the king's son back from the dead king. It's really weird. But anyway, they then have another revolution where they get rid of that guy, but they say to the new monarchs, hey, if you're going to be king and queen of England, you have to follow a certain set of rules. This is the English Bill of Rights. Before you can take the throne, you have to agree to this. These rights, some of them seem almost so basic that you maybe have never even thought about them today, because they're so ingrained in our society and our government, because they're stated pretty clearly in the Declaration of Independence, in the Constitution, and the American Bill of Rights. And one thing that we'll talk about a lot this year is when the American Revolution starts, the colonists don't necessarily want to be independent. They actually are fighting for what they view as their rights as English people, not as Americans, whatever that means. Okay, so things that are in the English Bill of Rights. Basically, you're going to have to ask Parliament, which is a collection of lords and then has some electoral element depending on when in English history you're talking about, before you can tax the people, right? So we have a Congress now, which is different than a parliament somewhat, but basically you got to ask somebody who represents the people before you just tax them. That is going to be a very big deal when we get to the American Revolution. You can petition the king. We can still petition our government today. So you really can't stop people from just asking the government to do something. Doesn't mean the government has to do it, but you can ask. And I know that sounds like a very basic thing. Like, of course you can ask for whatever, and then they can say no or yes or however it kind of goes out. But in a lot of times in history, when you have dictatorship and when you have monarchy, even asking the government could be kind of seen as a way to resist the government. It wasn't good. Keeping a standing army together in time of peace in the country is a big deal. As like an occupying force. This is a little different. Like today we have army bases. That's not really what this is talking about. It's more like if you have, armed army soldiers like out in the streets and patrolling and trying to look after your population, which we'll learn when we get to the American Revolution was happening during a time of peace. The right to bear arms is also in this document, which is going to be very important in American history, and a lot of Americans still hold very near today. Freedom of speech was specifically kind of for members of Parliament, but it's going to be very important here. If you say something, the government can't just lock you up all because they don't like it. Excessive bail and no cruel and unusual punishment. We'll learn about those this year when we talk about our government. And having a jury. So basically, there's a lot. There's even more in there. I actually skipped some. Those are just like some of the highlights. But basically, America didn't just appear, right? We didn't just come up with all these brand new ideas, and the next video is actually going to be about even more ideas that influenced our American revolutionaries and then our government. But America didn't just say, it was kind of taking a lot of older ideas and putting them together in a new way. It's not so much just like, hey, I have this awesome idea. No one's ever thought of this. And the English tradition is very important because obviously like the English colonies become America, and the Bill of Rights and the Magna Carta are a big place where you can see that. So we will catch you next time. Finger guns. Already regretting it.